From the fertile rainforests in the south to the sun-soaked sands of the north, Elsewhere may be the most carefree province in all Tamriel. Beyond the clashing swords of the Anakina tribes and the petty squabbles of the Palatine aristocrats, only two things truly matter to the Khajiit. These two objects unite the catfolk and lie at the very heart of their unified culture. A culture that transcends variations in geography and lifestyle. These objects are Jode and Joan, or Massa and Secunda. Of course, the moons matter to all living things on Nirn. Along Tamriel's coastline, fishermen watch the ebbing tides with keen eyes, adhering to generations of inherited knowledge, casting their lines and nets for the highest concentrations of fish. There is a magic to Massa and Secunda that all mortals can appreciate, even if that appreciation simply manifests as an admiration for the unrivaled beauty of a cloudless night sky, when the constellations come out to accompany Joan and Jode in their arc over the realm. But the significance of the moons to the Khajiit goes beyond all of these examples, and from the moment of birth the lunar phases determine their form and physiology. There are 17 documented variations. The reliable sources suggest there are others, numbering over 20. Whatever the case, the Khajiit is viscerally aware of the importance of the moons from the moment they enter the world, to the moment they depart it for the sands behind the stars. Kanafi, the goddess of the winds, gave the cats their swiftness, so that they could ride her zephyrs to the afterlife when the time came. And just as her breath carries passing souls upward, Kanafi also sends her love downward, blessing their crops with crystallized moonlight. This moonlight is trapped within the glimmering waters of the Topal Sea, and subsequently, thanks to the tides, washes upon the shores of Elsewhere, enriching the soils of the Thalmor sugarcane groves. This moonlight cultivates as moon sugar, the single most valuable resource to the Khajiit of Elsewhere. By consuming the sugar, the Khajiit believe they are imbibing tiny fragments of the eternal souls of Joan and Jode. The initial bout of ecstasy no doubt lifts every Khajiit's consciousness into the sky, giving them a sweet sample of how it must taste to ascend on Kanafi's wings. The inevitable overwhelming feeling of abandon and lethargy that follows brings them back down to Nirn, and streets strewn with catfolk in the throes of sugar fits is just part of Elsewhere's comprehensive lunar-centric culture. However, there is one major drawback associated with such a high cultural significance being devoted to one aspect of life. If you wish to manipulate, control, or harm the Khajiit, the means by which to do so is obvious. Should a foreign power learn to meddle with the moons, they would hypothetically have the whole race at their mercy. This seems like the kind of continent-wide event that would draw everyone's attention if it were to happen, but surely no one would have the sadistic audacity to tamper with such forces. Have you heard of the Void Knights? If you haven't, that's understandable, because this 2-year-long calamity was somehow forgotten about almost as soon as it was resolved. Likely due to the fact that it was overshadowed by the Great War that followed some decades after. And if you have heard of it, you'll know we have scarce little information on what truly went down. It began in the 4th Era 98. Nirn's two moons, Massa and Secunda, suddenly vanished from the night sky. The whole of Tamriel was perplexed by the phenomenon, but of course, no race was affected quite like the Khajiit. 2 years later, the moons returned, and the High Elves of Somerset, specifically the Thalmor, took credit for the return, crediting their newly discovered dawn magics. The Khajiit would hail the Aldmer as their saviors, and an alliance would form that heralded a great deal of future destruction. But there is potentially far more at play here than simply Joan and Jode nipping off for a brief holiday, and the Void Knights reek of conspiracy. So put on your Colovian tinfoil hats, and let's get into it. If we tackle the Void Knights conspiracy chronologically, our first stop is the tale of Drozira, the greatest Khajiit warrior of all time, at least according to one storyteller. Drozira and the ancient Khajiit heard the roar of Alkosh, the first cat, the dragon cat god of time. They followed that mighty bellows for 3 full days, stopping for nothing, not even moon sugar, and when they found him they joined his pride. But Lorkaj, the noisy one, ever the trickster, ever the contrarian, gave his roar instead to Ra Wolfhalf, to spite the Khajiiti warriors. This was because Lorkaj was jealous of the devotion the catfolk reserved for Alkosh. Telling you who Ra Wolfhalf is would be another video in itself, and we have covered it on the channel before. That link will be in the description. But simply put, Wolfhalf was an ancient Atmoran High King of Skyrim. He is shrouded in mystery and surrounded by mythos. He is believed to be a Shezarene, an avatar of Shor, or for the sake of this story, an avatar of Lorkaj. What happened next will prove crucial to our theories regarding the Void Knights. Seeing the ferocity of the Khajiit warriors, Ra Wolfhalf could not bring himself to put them to death. Using the roar that Lorkhaj had given him, he spoke to Massa and Secunda to move to their fullness in the sky. The Khajiit warriors became Sench, but Lorkhaj stripped from them all reason. The Sench and Sench Ra are two breeds of Khajiit. They are the largest, most physically powerful of the breeds, and the average Sench Ra stands as tall as 2 Ultima, and weigh as much as 50 of them. The Sench Khajiit are born on the rare occasion that both Massa and Secunda are full in the night sky, and the Sench Rat when Massa is full and Secunda is waxing or waning. This primordial tale gives us some important information. Firstly, Ra Wolfhalf displayed the ability to magically move the moons, or cause them to change the stage of their lunar cycle. And secondly, doing this allowed him to create a superior form of Khajiit, at least superior in terms of strength and size. You could call it a kind of lunar eugenics for the purpose of battle. This story sets a precedent for any future power who may want to replicate Wolfhalf's actions. And this would happen in the 6th century of the Second Era, when the Queen of Anakina, Chimera, used her ancestral amulet at the ancient ruins of Shadowdance Temple to move the moons. This amulet once belonged to Anakina Sharptongue, the Queen of the Khajiit during the Merethic Era and namesake for the kingdom. The amulet would allow the wielder to attune themselves with the lunar lattice, which is the barrier set in place by Fadamai to guard the Khajiit from the forces of Oblivion. The ability to metaphorically climb the lattice is not one given to all cats, for it was placed there for a reason. It keeps the mortal realm safe from greater powers, and it allows the Khajiit race to adopt their various forms. To move the moons, one must cross this lattice, and that's exactly what Queen Chimera did. I guess you could call it a form of dawn magic. So the knowledge required to move the moons at will can be found, as well as the relic needed for the ritual, and even the physical location it can be done from. This is important to remember when we return to the mystery of the Void Knights. But there is another noteworthy detail. Chimera had done all of this to prevent the dragons plaguing elsewhere from stealing Jode's lunar power. This was done by opening the moon gate to the plane of Jode. Long story short, to open the path, the moons needed to be unnaturally aligned. In other words, an eclipse. The act of moving the moons to create an artificial eclipse will undoubtedly have a serious impact on the Khajiit born during this time. We know just how important the phases of the moons are for newborns after all. The spiritual leaders of the Khajiit are known as mains, and they are very rare. So rare that there is no documented time in Elsewhere when 2 mains were active at once. They are born under seldom seen circumstances, specifically when Joan and Jode align in an eclipse, or a dark moon as it is often called. Some say during this time a 3rd moon appears. Does this mean that artificially aligning the moons in an unscheduled eclipse would create thousands of new mains across Elsewhere? Abner Farn feared as much, so he sought out an answer, and Clan Mother Hazuni provided an answer. She says, "They come to us as cubs, born under the dark eclipse. They are forgotten mains destined to never rule. We give them purpose and guidance. We sing the words of Alkosh so that his wisdom may collect in their hearts like the bottom of an hourglass. These secret defenders who shall join the pride of Alkosh. When Alkosh frowns, they rise. When Elsewhere cries, they fight. And with their dying breath, Kanafi will be there to guide them to a place beyond the sands behind the stars. These forgotten mains are special, though they will never lead the Khajiit. They are like heroes from prophecies, only excluded from their divine purpose. Were some foreign power to build an army of cats, they could theoretically use the moons to artificially produce the perfect Khajiit specimens. And this historical context brings us back to the Void Knights. In Khajiit culture, clan mothers disseminate myths and lead the cats in their beliefs, and maintain autonomy from the main in matters of cultural and spiritual leadership. When a clan mother speaks, it shouldn't be taken lightly. Clan Mother Hazuni told us about the fate of those born under the contrived eclipse, and Clan Mother Arnisi shed some important light on the Khajiit creation story. The Khajiit must be the best climbers, for if Massa and Secunda fail, they must climb Kanafi's breath to set the moons back in their courses. The necessity of a main to lead the cats on this task of ascension is vital, and that is one reason why only one exists at any given time. The idea of hundreds of Khajiit butchering one another to prove themselves the true main would be a catastrophe in times of need. When the main reveals themselves before the catfolk, the Khajiit are quick to unite behind him or her. In olden times, the Khajiit would shave off their own manes in deference to the main, braiding them into locks that he would incorporate into his own gigantic mane. Nowadays, while all Khajiit still remove their manes, they do so largely as a symbolic sacrifice. Once again, we return to that troubling hypothetical. What if some foreign power wished to control the catfolk? Well, they'd want to use the power of the moons to create the best breeds for battle, and they'd certainly want to depose of any spiritual leaders to sow as much disunity as possible, leaving elsewhere ripe for manipulation. One such foreign power had been growing in the southwest. The Thalmor were a small, relatively insignificant political party in the Somerset Isles. They'd achieved some success during the Second Aldmeri Dominion, but by the Fourth Era, they were little more than a radical fringe movement. But the chaos of the Oblivion crisis changed that, and provided them with a spectacular opportunity to grasp for power. In the aftermath, when the gates were sealed and the Daedron no longer tore across the Isles, the Thalmor took credit. Those present in the Imperial City would have known the true reasons the crisis ended, but far away in Somerset, the Thalmor saw the potential of alternative facts. By the 22nd year of the Fourth Era, they had overthrown the Aldmeri monarchy and seized complete control of the province, renaming it Alinor. By the year 29, Valenwood was back in the Dominion. Only elsewhere remained, and in the year 48, the Main was conveniently assassinated. Out-of-law sources, aka Michael Kirkbride, points the finger at the Thalmor, and that makes a lot of sense. This wasn't quite enough to bring the Khajiit back into the fold though. Something more drastic was needed. And this is where we get into some not technically confirmed, but come on mate, as if this isn't what happened territory. The moons vanished from the sky in the year 98, in an event we call the Void Nights. Not much is actually documented about the phenomenon. Moons go, 2 years pass, moons come back. No one has really stopped to ask how or why the moons disappeared. But now that we know the story of Queen Chimera, the amulet, and the Shadow Dance Temple, we know it's possible to change the trajectory of the moons. When asked to elaborate on the Void Nights, Michael Kirkbride called it a Thalmor eugenics experiment. Eugenics being the philosophy or act of trying to improve a race by encouraging the reproduction of desirable traits. Basically, it's like breeding dogs or racehorses. It's absolutely possible that internal conflicts may have led certain Khajiit factions to meddle with Joan and Jode, but it's just too perfect for the Aldmeri Dominion and their ambitions. By removing the moons from the night sky, it stands to reason that all of the Khajiit born during this 2-year period would be forgotten mains, heroes left without a divine purpose to fight for. When the 2-year period ended, the moons returned and the Thalmor took credit, claiming they had discovered previously unknown dawn magics to do so. The High Elf faction has a history of taking credit for things they didn't do, but if they moved the moons in the first place, it's entirely possible they returned them. The Khajiit were so relieved to have the moons back that they revered the Altmer, and before long they had dissolved the Elsewhere Confederacy, and the 2 independent kingdoms of Anakina and Palatine joined the Aldmeri Dominion as client states. This happened in the year 115, when all of those Void Knight newborns would be growing into adults. We know that the Great War between the Empire and the Dominion was not far away, and the Thalmor had just bolstered the Dominion's ranks with a generation of perfect Khajiit soldiers. An army of forgotten mains, as well as their sons and daughters, would fight for the High Elves against the Imperials. And while nothing is confirmed canonically, the Void Knights most definitely reek of Thalmor intervention. What do you think? Was it the Aldmeri Dominion? Was it internal strife? Or was it just a freak occurrence of nature? If you want to weigh in, you know where to write it. Thanks so much for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Drew, this has been FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you next time.